Can you imagine being leading a Formula One race with the fastest car of the weekend? And having your own team decide to ruin everything with a strategy that no one understands? Well, that happened to Oscar Piastri in Qatar. And not only that, hidden images came to light. And since then, many no longer believe in McLaren's innocence, internal sabotage, or simple incompetence. Today we are going to expose everything. The 2025 Qatar Grand Prix did not begin as just another race for McLaren, but as a declaration of power. From free practice to the sprint, the MCL39 was clearly the car to beat. At a track like Lusail, where consistent pace and tire thermal management often decide the fate of a race, the British team seemed to have everything under control. Oscar Piastri had dominated Saturday with an impeccable performance. Pole position for the sprint, devastating pace in long runs, and a seamless execution that culminated in a resounding victory in the short race. That Saturday afternoon, the narrative was clear. McLaren had the best car, the best pace, and the most confident driver of the weekend. Even inside the garage, there was an air of tranquility, almost triumphalism. But everything changed a few hours later with a single decision that ruined everything. On Sunday, in the middle of the race, on lap 7, a safety car completely transformed the situation. Most teams reacted immediately and called their drivers to the pits. It was a golden opportunity to stop without losing too much time, put on fresh tires, and have the tactical flexibility for the rest of the GP. But McLaren did something difficult to understand. It left its two drivers on the track. Neither Oscar Piastri nor Lando Norris were called. Andrea Stella later tried to justify it by saying that they didn't expect everyone else to stop. An insufficient explanation considering the competitive context of the season. Why was this decision so serious? Because in Qatar, Pirelli had issued a technical directive requiring the duration of each stint to be limited to a maximum of 18 to 20 laps with certain compounds, due to problems due to microfractures in the sidewall of the tires. This meant that it was not simply a matter of optional strategy, but a critical security and performance requirement. By not taking advantage of the safety car, McLaren condemned its drivers to a conditional race from minute 1. Instead of taking control of the pace with clean air and new tires, they were forced to artificially lengthen their first stint so as not to compromise the second with too narrow a window. Piastri, who had shown devilish speed in the long and medium run, became a victim of his own strategy. His second stint was executed under extreme conditions, with traffic, dirty air, and tires at the limit of their durability. While Verstappen managed his pace with absolute freedom after having stopped under a safety car, Piastri went against the flow, asking for explanations on the radio, feeling that a victory was slipping away from him that, due to pure pace, was his from the first minute of the weekend. Upon crossing the finish line, the difference with first place was not only more than 8 seconds, but also a devastating feeling: helplessness. The cameras captured a Piastri who did not celebrate, did not greet, did not smile. His body language spoke 1,000 words. There was no explosive rage, but rather an icy silence, typical of someone who knows that he did not lose because of him. And that, for a pilot, is the hardest blow. This was not just a bad strategic call. It was a fracture in trust. Because when a team makes such obvious mistakes in a position of clear advantage, the driver not only feels harmed, he begins to doubt whether he is really being treated fairly. And in a team that, until now, seemed to have put its past demons behind it, Qatar was a harsh relapse into old practices of indecision, improvisation, and costly mistakes. The key is not only in what they did, but in how they did it. There was no clear conversation beforehand. It was not explained to Piastri in real time why the stop was not made. There was no clear plan B when they realized the mistake. And that was the most damaging thing. Because a top team can make mistakes, but it cannot not have answers. And that day, McLaren didn't have them. To understand the gravity of the moment that McLaren is experiencing, you have to look beyond a failed race in Qatar. Because what we saw there was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, this team has been accumulating friction, mistrust, and decisions that not only affect the track, but the relationship between its two drivers and its technical structure. After McLaren's debacle in Qatar, the noise did not just come from within the paddock. In fact, the real fire broke out outside the circuits. Just a few hours after the Grand Prix, platforms such as YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and Reddit began to fill with clips sensationally titled, "Piastri sabotaged by McLaren," or "Leaks reveal internal betrayal at the Woking box." 10-minute videos with explosive thumbnails featured slowed-down images, distorted radio audio, and arguments based on assumptions rather than verifiable data. The main focus of these viral pieces was an alleged hidden footage, in which Piastri's team was seen acting differently from Norris's in the pits. One of the most shared videos showed a pit stop in slow motion, zooming in on the face of a supposedly annoyed or nervous mechanic, accompanied by suspenseful music and text suggesting, "What was happening here? Why was the team's attitude so different?" Everything was suggestive, never affirmative. But that was enough for thousands of comments to assume the worst: sabotage, favoritism, internal betrayal. The most serious thing was not the content itself, but the way in which it was interpreted by sectors of the community. Some of the most influential creators, although without real access to sources within the team, began to establish connections between this case and broader theories, such as an alleged leak that linked Piastri to secret negotiations with Ferrari for 2026. In that narrative universe fueled by clicks, McLaren's punishment in Qatar was a disguised message. And so, a failed strategy became corporate revenge. But when one analyzes the original material, the onboard cameras, the publicly available radio audios, the technical reports, nothing points to sabotage. Piastri's save was executed with precision. Reaction times were standard. There is no objective evidence that it has been given unequal treatment in terms of strategy, at least not from an intentional point of view. What there was a bad reading of the race. Serious but not conspiratorial. Oscar Piastri, aware of the narrative that surrounded him, was direct in his statements. When Brazilian journalists asked him if he believed his team was deliberately harming him, he responded bluntly, "No, that's not the case." And he added something crucial: there are clear technical reasons behind the result. That response sought to defuse the media bomb, but the truth is that the damage had already been done. Because on social media, a calm denial never has the same viral reach as a video titled with exclamation points. This episode perfectly illustrates how social media has altered the perception of events in Formula One. What was once a conversation between engineers in the press room is today a war of public narratives in real time. And for McLaren, the challenge is no longer just solving its internal problems, but also controlling the external narrative. In this new era, a strategic mistake can become a global scandal in a matter of hours. And when the digital environment is already predisposed to seeing hidden intentions due to the accumulation of previous errors, lack of transparency, or poorly managed rivalries, any ambiguity becomes a conspiracy. It doesn't matter if it's real. It matters if it looks real. And that is the danger. Because a narrative that is repeated enough ends up shaping public opinion, the pressure on engineers, and even the decisions of team managers. Algorithms do not distinguish between serious analysis and sensational speculation. They reward content that generates a reaction. And if that reaction is indignation, so much the better. In this context, McLaren needs more than track victories. You need to regain control of your story. Be transparent. Be consistent. Because in a season where every detail counts, losing the battle of perception can be as costly as missing a pit stop. What happened in Qatar left much more than a defeat. He left a void of confidence that is felt in every statement, in every look, and in every decision McLaren has made since then. It was not a normal defeat. It was a sign. A warning that something is being misaligned within a team that seemed to have found the perfect formula between technical performance, strategic management, and internal harmony. Because it wasn't just a wrong strategy. Those types of mistakes, although costly, are common in Formula One. What was different here was the context in which it occurred. A season where McLaren is no longer the challenger without pressure, but the team to beat. Where any wrong decision is no longer seen as part of learning, but as a direct threat to your legitimacy as a title contender. And most dangerous of all, a season where every mistake is perceived as a sign of favoritism or internal betrayal. In this new ecosystem, Piastri not only competes against Verstappen, Hamilton, or Russell. He competes against the perception of being number 2 on his own team. And that perception, although not based on verifiable facts, is real in its impact. It affects morale, the dynamics in the garage, the relationship with your engineer, and the way each tactical decision is interpreted by the media and audience. In short, Qatar was not an isolated accident. It was a mirror. One that reflected all the cracks that McLaren needs to repair before it's too late. Because in Formula One, it's not just the fastest car that wins. The team that works best as a whole wins. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.